Hello and welcome to 3ABN Today Live. This is our 2-hour sitting together. And allow me once again to thank you for sharing this part of your day with us. Now, I need to set some parameters here right off the bat, because usually we say, sit back, relax, and enjoy the program. Well, that is patently inappropriate for tonight's program. One, because we've got David Asscherick here. And whenever you have David Asscherick, any place, sit back and relax, kind of out the window. So we're going to say, seat backs up, tray tables up in the what is it, upright and locked position, yeah. And buckle your seat belts and hold on, because we're going to be moving fast. We've got a lot to talk about. And our subject matter for this night is creation. We've been talking about the attack of the devil in so many areas on the gospel of Christ. And one of the areas that we see him putting himself into, inserting himself into, is the idea of creation, the notion that we came from the hand of loving God. And so we want to, again, buttress that thought. We want to talk about that. We want to encourage you, those who may be under attack or who may be having questions that you cannot answer. Tonight we're going to try to answer that, give you some more ammunition, some more armor, as it were, maybe even turn you from a defensive person to an offensive person who can stand up for the cause of Christ. So that's what we're trying to do tonight. My guest, again, is David Asscherick. David, good to have you here.
Always good to be here, C.A.
When I think of David, I think of that text in the Bible that says, the Spirit bloweth where it listeth, and thou hearest the sound thereof, but cannot tell where it's coming or going. So David, of course, is a favorite here at 3ABN. We've heard him preach, and when you see that blur running back and forth across,
I was wondering,
that is David Asscherick.
I was wondering where you were going with that. Okay, so the wind blows where it wants, so you don't know where it's going.
You hear the sound. We know it's a sermon. We know it's Asscherick, but sometimes you can't see him because he's moving so fast. But he's going to slow down just enough tonight to give us the word. And he's brought a good doctor with him. We have our very own doctor in the house. This is Dr. Sean Pitman. Sean, good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
He's going to help us walk through this mine, as it were, this landmine of creationism. He brings the professional side of this. We're theologians, we're preachers. We can approach it from that side, but Sean can give us a whole other perspective, which we will take a look at tonight. And of course, in the second hour, we're going to take some questions from you. We've got a lot to cover, an awful lot to cover. We want to get through that material. And if in listening to that, you have questions, call them, write them, send them, and we'll try to answer them in a second. Gentlemen, we've got so much to talk about. I think I want to start with the good doctor, because we sort of know you.
Sure. I'm a known quantity.
Sean, where are you from?
Originally from Alabama and Mississippi area. My parents still live in Alabama, the Montgomery area, and my dad's the trust services director there. But my wife and I now live in Northern California, where I practice pathology.
Now, when you say pathology, a lot of people may not know what that entails. What does a pathologist do?
Oh, it's very wide-ranging, but mostly it's dealing with the study of disease. And a large part of my job, I basically tell surgeons what they took out.
Okay.
Yeah, put it back. No.
How long have you been in medicine?
I graduated in '97 from Loma Linda.
From Loma Linda.
And then I went to the Army for 4 years. I had a military medical scholarship. And that was a lot of fun. Then after that, I went to pathology residency. After that, I did kind of family practice, urgent care, ER type stuff with the Army. And then after that, I went back to Loma Linda for pathology.
Oh, I see. Married?
Yes, married after the Army.
And children?
I just had my first, Wesley.
Good for you.
Yeah, it's a beautiful little boy.
As a pathologist, good deal.
Yeah.
I know what this is.
The little boy got all of his good looks from Sean.
I see.
Yeah.
Because his wife still has hers.
I see.
I lost all mine.
Because you've obviously done extensive study in creation. Where did the marriage sort of come for you as a pathologist and this interest in creationism?
Well, I kind of started out very young. Even from early childhood, I started wondering about evolution, and if evolution was true, what about Christianity? What about Seventh-day Adventism? And I asked a lot of questions, even as a child, that weren't satisfactorily answered for me. Even through medical school, I didn't really understand why evolution wasn't true. Where were the limits, if there were any? I mean, if you can have lots of different dogs, lots of different types of cats, and all these things, and they all change over time, and new breeds develop, and all these things. Where's the limitation? And I couldn't figure that out until after medical school, where I decided to devote enough time into it so I could figure out one way or the other.
You know, it's funny. Every time I hear someone speak on creation, new things pop up in my mind. This idea of where's the limitation? Can a dog mutate so much that it's no longer a dog? Or does it have to stay a dog? If we follow that evolutionary mindset. Now, and of course, we're going to talk about that as we move into the program. But David, you have fairly recently relocated to California.
That's right.
Arise has moved.
That's correct.
Talk a little bit about what you're doing now.
Well, we're continuing to run the school there in California. Arise has been running now for 8 years. In fact, we're right in the middle of a course right now, 52 students. And we've just transitioned. You've been to Yosemite?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so we're just right outside of Yosemite. We live in heaven on earth. And no, it's absolutely beautiful. We're at the top of a mountain, and we love it there. We loved Michigan as well, but you know, when the Lord opens doors, you know about that.
You got to walk through.
You got to walk through.
Tell us, what does Arise do?
Arise is very simply a training school for primarily lay people, though we do get some clergy that come, some pastors and evangelists, but we basically teach people how to be effective communicators of the gospel, both in a public sense and also in a person-to-person sense. We just teach people how to introduce others to Jesus, to His Word, to His truth, and to His end-time message.
I see. A course of study at Arise is how long?
Well, we have lots of different courses, but the typical course, the longest course, the course we're sort of best known for is 4 months, always in the fall, but we also have 2-week courses, we have a 3-week course, we have many weekends and week-long courses that we do in churches, but the 4-month course that we do, what we call our flagship program, always in the fall, in California. It's been in Michigan, but now in California. Sure. And we take up to about 50 students. That's all we can take. I wish we could take more, but we're maxed out in terms of staff with Matt and Randy and myself, and then we also just the facilities, getting above 50, and then you kind of lose that feel, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, we love it. Absolutely love it.
Now, I know in Michigan you pastored some and did Arise. Are you full-time Arise or are you pastoring?
Full-time Arise now, yeah. I sort of did the pastor Arise thing, and you know how this works. Something suffers, you know. When you try to do, is Arise getting the attention, then the church is suffering. Is the church getting attention, then Arise is suffering. And so, fortunately, the Central California Conference, they really believe in the ministry. They've just given me the opportunity and the privilege of working with my 3 associates, Nathan, Randy, and Matt. And Nathan pastors the church there, the Sonora Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Yes.
We assist him. We're right in the middle of an evangelistic meeting right now. But my full-time job is the speaker director for Arise, and absolutely love it.
Praise God.
I think I have the best life in the world. You probably think you have the best life in the world. He probably thinks he has the best, but no, it's a privilege. I mean, just to be in the work of God is, man, praise His name. Yeah,
we do each and every day. Now, I want to, I want to kind of, as the Lord said of Lazarus, loose you and let you go, and kind of, stay out of the way. But I do want to spend just a moment or two trying to set some context for our discussion tonight, because you've been here before, and we've talked about creationism, and it is a very current area of attack that the church is under. So we want to just set a little context. You became aware that there were Christian schools teaching what is not classic Christian doctrine when it came to who we are, where we came from, how we got here, and where we're going, because they all sort of build each on the other.
Interrelated.
Yeah, there are those who believe Daddy was a gorilla, Mama was a chimpanzee, and they're bringing that into the classroom, and you wrote a letter. Pick it up from there, talk about that, if you will.
Well, you basically nailed it. There was, it came to my attention that some of this was being taught in some schools that I have a vested interest in and that I really value, Christian schools, Adventist schools, and I wrote a letter that was initially just intended to be a private letter. It wasn't sort of an open, public letter at all. It was a private letter, but as often happens in the internet age, that letter became more commonly known and then went basically viral overnight.
Yeah.
And I suppose thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps more, have read that letter, and I think it's played a small role in raising awareness.
Yes.
Are there good reasons to believe in a literal 6-day creation, or is this just something that we hold to tenaciously as a tradition? And of course I believe, and you believe, that Scripture teaches this without question. Of course Dr. Pitman believes that as well, and we believe that as a people. We're Bible-believing Christians. But at the same time, we want to be open to evidence. We don't want to just cling to what the church teaches. Traditionally, we want to say, can this be supported on an evidentiary basis and not just a scriptural basis? And so I think that letter has helped to raise awareness. And, I mean, I get hundreds, probably, well, no, it would be thousands of emails since I've sent that letter. And I'm thrilled to see that, we've just had the creation celebration, creation Sabbath. Things are beginning to happen, and I wouldn't even take 1/2 of 1% of the credit for that. I give all the credit to God. But I think that there are different people like Dr. Pitman, myself, 3ABN, and others that are sort of agitating the issue and saying, hey, you know, what do we believe? And let's articulate very clearly what it is that we believe and why we believe what we believe. And so it's exciting. It's absolutely exciting.
It's good, one, to redress and revisit your belief systems every now and again, because things will come along to shake that. What we came to understand when we began to air these kinds of programs, that there is a large reservoir of people who feel as you do, who may have kept silent, but who now know that there is a forum and that there are fellows who believe like they do, are beginning to speak up. So the letter became seed, dare we say.
Sort of a catalyst.
Precisely, for thousands of individuals who held the same kinds of belief. And so we decided to bring these programs back periodically to try to say, hey, this is where we stand.
Absolutely.
And we can do no other.
The Apostle Paul says, examine yourselves, whether you be in the faith or not. And of course, he's talking about personal examination, but as a church, you know, we always need to step back and sort of say, hey, is what we believe right? And we believe we have some truth.
Yes.
But we certainly don't believe we have all the truth. Truth is progressive, and we're progressing with God, we're marching with God, and so the progressive nature of truth, or maybe the better way of saying it is the progressive understanding of truth, our understanding, calls for constant revisitation and constant evaluation. And you know, we've decided this is our standard. This is where we're coming back to. But at the same time, we don't want to affirm this in the face of evidence that may be absolutely contrary. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Is what we see here consistent with what the world around us, sort of the evidentiary empirical world, is telling us, and we're going to find that there's absolute consistency.
Praise God. Well, the Bible says we ought to be able to give a reason for the hope that is within us. And if truth is truth, it can withstand inquiry. In fact, it demands inquiry.
I can't tell you how thrilled I am to hear you say that. So many times we sort of, you know, like Dr. Pitman was saying there right at the beginning, you know, he was a child, he was asking questions, he wanted to know what are the limits. And the reality is that many people fear intellectual conflict, they fear investigation, but truth can stand scrutiny. I just heard a quotation recently. It basically said that sound faith has nothing to fear from right reason. I mean, if what we believe is true, bring on the investigation, bring on the analysis, bring on the evaluation and the scrutiny, and you know, let's get the cards on the table.
Precisely.
And that's what we want to try and do tonight, and I think our viewers are going to find it very persuasive.
Yeah, we've left the "'cause I said so" age. When I was a child, my dad would say, you know, do this. Why, Dad? Because I said so.
Because I said so.
Yeah, well, that doesn't work. And it doesn't work with God.
I'm so glad that he's reasonable. You know, he says there, come let us reason together. It's not...
Well, he gave us big brains for a reason.
Yeah, yeah, good man.
Not just because I said so. I mean, that would take a really small brain to understand that.
Yeah.
So he wants us to appreciate him and for who he is as the creator.
See, that's a pathologist talking. He sees it. Now, as we discuss things through this night, you may have questions that you want to send in to us. You may do so at live@3abn.org. That's live@3abn.org, and we'll try to address those questions in the second half. Or again, you can call us 618-627-4651, and we will try to take those questions in the second half as we discuss creation from 4 different aspects, dare I say.
Yeah.
And the first one is, I think it's why believe in creation at all? Why even bother to believe in it? So let's go.
Sort of dive in.
Yeah.
Hey, I think my wife just sent an email, so can I have that one? I'm sure she just sent an email.
Yeah, you can have it.
Okay, thank you. Well, you nailed it. What we want to do is just basically we want to ask 4 questions and then try and provide answers to those questions.
Great.
And the first of those 4 questions is, why believe in creation at all? In other words, why should we believe that versus some other competing thing that might be believed? And so maybe we'll just sort of turn it over to you, Doctor, and why? Why believe in this?
Well, for me, it's always been a conflict of science and religion. A lot of people think science and religion are separate enterprises, different paths to truth, if you like. And that never made sense to me. I think that truth is truth. It has the same origin. If God is in existence, then he's the God of both inspiration, the Bible, the written word, as well as nature, and also scientific inquiry. The ability to understand things scientifically is also derived from God, I believe. And if that is actually true, there should be some sort of way to demonstrate this unity, this linking. And I think there's been quite a number of ways in science to demonstrate this link, this unity between inspiration and science.
So this idea that all truth is God's truth.
Right. Yeah, I don't think there's kind of separate paths to truth. To me, all truth has is unified.
points in the same direction.
Correct.
So some people would say, well, you know, you're a religionist, or you believe in God, and I'm a scientist, and I believe in science or whatever, and you can have your religion and I'll have my science. But what you're saying is that these aren't competing or even different enterprises, they're one and the same.
Right. I think that science has religious implications, regardless of the type of science you're doing. And religion, if it's useful or valuable, has scientific implications as well.
Okay, so sort of walk us through that a little bit. We're asking the question, why believe in creation at all? Maybe give us an answer.
Well, for example, the universe is a very understandable place. In fact, it's mathematical. It's eminently logical. And that's very odd because it doesn't have to be that way. And it kind of confused a lot of people. Why is the universe so mathematically precise, mathematically balanced? It's written, it seems to be written in the language of mathematics. And it's understandable to our minds because of that, because we understand the language of mathematics, and it seems to be kind of a mystery why this is true. And I'm not the only one who's noticed this. Famous scientists have noticed it as well.
People like Albert Einstein,
right,
and others. I think you've got a quotation there from Einstein. One of the things that has always impressed me is not just that the universe is amazing, but that there are minds here to grasp the universe.
Yes.
And that itself has scientific implications, obviously, because we're making observations about the universe, but also certainly religious implications.
Right, exactly. I mean, if there are minds to grasp the universe and its nature, it seems rather odd that that might be true. Why is the universe balanced so that minds can understand it, and why are minds there to understand
Absolutely. it? So this quotation from Einstein is right to that point.
Yeah, in 1956, Einstein writes in a letter to a friend, he says, "You may find it strange that I consider the comprehensibility of the world to the degree that we may speak of such comprehensibility as a miracle or an eternal mystery. That is, the miracle which grows increasingly persuasive with the increasing development of knowledge."
Okay.
And along these same lines, there's a physicist, well-known physicist, Eugene Wigner.
Nobel Prize winner, I think.
Nobel Prize winner. And he writes similar. He says, "The enormous usefulness of mathematics is something bordering on the mysterious. There is no rational explanation for it. The miracle of the appropriateness of the language of mathematics for the formulation of the laws of physics is a wonderful gift which we neither understand nor deserve."
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's interesting, and everything is another brick in a wall. You have this order, this symmetry, all around us. Everything has order, has symmetry, is based on mathematical formulas. Then when you come to the highest life form on this planet, it's random. It's kind of incongruous. Everything else is order, everything else is symmetry, everything else is logical, and then man is illogical. His creation is illogical.
Got it.
It doesn't follow.
And I've heard sort of a paraphrase of what Einstein is saying here. He has said in another place very similar to this, that the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is precisely its comprehensibility.
Because there's nothing about the universe inherently that it would have to be comprehensible to us.
Yes.
But apparently mathematics, for example, to quote Wigner, to sort of talk about Wigner, mathematics is giving us obviously real information about the world. It's telling us something about the world. So why should that be the case? That sort of screams purpose.
Or why should it be logical at all? Why should we be able to understand it? The universe could have been programmed in so many ununderstandable ways that we could not comprehend. The fact that it's been written in a way that we can actually appreciate it is a great mystery.
And the founders of the, let's not forget that the founders of what we might call the modern scientific method, people like Galileo and Newton and others, many of these people believe that the scientific enterprise was possible precisely because they were sort of discovering the mind of God, so to speak. They expected there to be order. They expected there to be logic. They expected there to be some rational substance or fabric to the universe, and they were discovering things. They weren't inventing. Newton didn't invent the laws of physics, Newtonian physics. He discovered them.
Right. And he thought by discovering and by searching out, picking up pebbles along the beach, as he said, he was learning small little bits about the mind of God.
Yeah, yeah. You know, that, again, an exciting thing. The fact that this logical, sequential way God has put things together allows us to understand our world. If the sun came up in the east one day and the west one day and the north one day, you could never get a handle on your life. If the world was as random as some would like it to be, we could never understand God, ourselves, our place in the universe, or the universe itself. It's the fact that it is ordered and random and sequential that allows us to understand where we are and what we're doing. That's a great argument.
I love it.
Yeah. And beyond that, it's the universe is finely tuned, not just to be understandable, but to actually support life. It seems like it was made for us.
Yeah, I love this. These are sometimes called the anthropic principle or the anthropic constraints, coming from anthropos, anthropology, the study of man. And basically what you have is that the universe looks as though it had man in mind.
Yes, yes.
And the illustration that I like to use, we're going to have Dr. Pitman walk us through a few of these, but the illustration I like to use is imagine, well, you just had a child. You just had a baby boy, which is exciting. Congratulations, by the way. And let's say that I didn't know that you and Sigrid were expecting, so I go over to your house and I say, hey, Sean, can I use the restroom? You say, yeah, it's down the hallway. Of course, I know where it is. I've been to your house many times. But if I go down the hallway and I just maybe glance through a door and I see a door slightly ajar, and as I look in there, I see a blue wall, and I sort of push the door open and I see a blue crib and a blue changing table and a blue wastebasket and a blue, you know, what am I going to assume?
We have bad decorating habits.
Well, I didn't want to say that on live television. But, you know. No, but the truth of the matter is that I would see the environment and I would say, oh, they're expecting a boy. And the universe is very much like that.
Yeah.
Physicists, cosmologists, and others sort of look at the universe and they say, well, this looks like this was made for us.
Right, on every level it seems like, from the universe as a whole as far as fundamental constants are concerned, to galaxies, to even the structure of the solar system.
So let's sort of walk through those in just give us one of these anthropic coincidences at, say, the universal level, at the big picture level.
All right, matter in the universe, stars and solar systems and everything are flying away from each other at a certain speed. Everything is flying away from each other. And the degree, that speed is very precise. It's precise to 1 × 10 to the 121st.
Okay.
Now, this is a massive number. I mean, 10 to the power of 121 is enormous. For example, to understand how big this number is, there are only about 10 to the 80th atoms in the whole universe, at least the visible universe. And so it's massively...
So that's it, just for our viewers, that's 10 with 80 zeros behind it.
Yeah.
Right.
And you're saying there's
the precision
of the expansion of the universe, the rate of expansion.
It has to be precise to 1 × 10 to the power of 121.
121. Okay, so that's 121 zeros.
So if it's off by 1 0 out of 121, the universe would either expand too fast to form planets able to sustain life, or it would crunch back down on itself and destroy everything.
So the level of precision there, I mean, try to give us, is there some kind of an illustration? Can you make that?
The level of precision, for example, would be like...
I mean, who can conceive of that number? Give us a...
All right, yeah. Let's say I wrote my name on a piece of sand, a grain of sand.
Which I've seen him do before.
Really small. And then I take it out to the Sahara Desert and I throw it somewhere in there and mix it up randomly.
Okay.
And I blindfold you and I say, go find the grain of sand. And
in the Sahara Desert.
Let's say you're just really lucky and you happen blindfolded to pick up the right grain of sand. Now do that 5 times in a row. That's the degree of precision.
Wow.
That's this 10 to 121 zeros behind it.
Right.
That's a concept the mind really can't wrap itself around. It's just, you just accept it in faith.
So,
dare I say?
Hey, listen.
You can't conceptualize that. You know, you just.
No, so
just
basically, you know, if you want to go to Vegas, you know, what kind of odds do you need before you say maybe something's behind it?
Yeah.
Type of deal.
Okay. Not that we're advocating going to Vegas.
No.
So that's sort of at the universal level. Things are expanding at just the right speed, and if it was only slightly different, the whole thing goes pear-shaped. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So now let's sort of bring it down to the level of galaxy.
Yeah, the galaxy is interesting because the location of our solar system and the Earth within the galaxy is in just the right spot, called the habitable zone within the Milky Way galaxy. It's about 2/3 of the way out, which is, if it was any closer to the center, then the radiation from the center of the galaxy would be too strong to sustain complex life. And if it was a little bit farther out from the center of the galaxy, then there wouldn't be enough heavy elements to support the complexity of life.
So we're in the right neighborhood, so to speak.
Yeah.
We're in the right neighborhood, and beyond that, we're also in the right spot within that neighborhood.
Wow.
For example, the galaxies have arms.
Okay. They sort of look like
a whirlpool.
Whirlpool spinning.
Right, and they have these arms, but we're not within an arm, we're kind of in between two arms. So we can see out of the galaxy to study the universe. If we were in an arm, we couldn't see out.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's
fascinating.
very fortunate that we just happened
So
to
we're
be
not only in the right zip code, we're in the right house on the right floor.
Right.
Oh, there we go. We're in the right chair.
Yeah, right.
Are you in the right chair? So, okay, so that's sort of the galaxy level. And these are the kinds of things that scientists, they're not picking up the Bible and saying, you know, like we said at the beginning there, because I said so. These are the kinds of things that scientists are looking at and they're saying, wow, that sort of smacks of intentionality.
Right. Well, maybe if it's okay if you had like 1 or 2 or 3 of these things, but there's dozens of them.
Okay, so let's come even closer to home. Let's get in our solar system. Now we're here with, what, 7 or 8 planets?
Yeah, the solar system is interesting. Like the Earth's distance from the sun is just the right distance, because if it was any closer, just a fraction closer, then it would be too hot and everything would kind of boil off. If it was too farther away, it would be too cold and everything would be frozen and unable to support complex life, at least. And also, the orbit of the Earth is nearly circular. It's not exactly circular, it's somewhat elliptical, but it's nearly circular, which is unlike most of the other planets, which
most of the other planets are more elliptical.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, if the Earth was more elliptical like that, you would get extremes in temperature variation.
Too far away from the sun, too close to the sun.
Yeah. Right. And the moon. The moon is also the right size and distance from the Earth. If the moon was more massive, for example, you would get massive tidal action that would cover large portions of continents.
Because the tides are caused by the moon.
Right.
And if the moon had bigger mass or was closer, then we would have these
massive tidal actions.
Okay.
And if the moon was too far away, you wouldn't have enough tidal action to stir up the oceans to keep it well oxygenated. It would become stale, stagnant, and everything would die.
Now, you had told me one time, this is quite fascinating, C.A., he had told me one time about the color of the sun.
Yeah, the color of the sun is also interesting, because if it was redder or bluer, photosynthesis wouldn't work as well.
Or maybe not at all, perhaps.
Or maybe not at all.
So this does give emphasis to your point that it seems as though the universe was made for man to inhabit it, that these things were ordered just as they needed to be so that we could live.
Yes, and it even goes down further, like to the atomic level.
So now we're going really small.
Right. Yeah, because the atom is quite a sizable bundle of nice coincidences, if you want to coincidences.
Okay.
For example, the size of the electron versus the proton, for example, are very different, almost 2,000 times more massive, the proton versus the electron.
The electron's just the little one.
This tiny little thing flying around the nucleus, right?
And it's 2,000 times smaller.
Almost like 1,836 or something like that.
Smaller than the proton.
Than the proton.
Okay.
But the charge is exactly the same. In counterbalance, the opposite charges, but the same
electron positive,
same degree.
Electron negative, proton positive.
Versus, the same degree of charge. Whoa. And that's very interesting, because there's numerous parameters between the proton and electron. None of them are the same, except for the charge is exactly the same.
Really?
If it was any different to any significant, well, any small degree, there would complex molecules would not develop, would not be able.
Because you wouldn't have a stability.
Right.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
And also the same thing with the mass. The ratio of mass between proton and electron, if that were slightly different, also complex molecules could not develop.
So it's not just an issue of the charge, it's the mass.
Right. All these parameters have to be like they are.
Exactly like they are.
Right.
And so these are the things that physicists look at, physicists like Paul Davies. I think we've got a quotation here from
it's very interesting.
Paul Davies.
Paul Davies, in specific, he kind of points out that physicists, even more than biologists, believe that at least some sort of higher power behind it all. If you call it God or whatever it is, some sort of intelligence. He's an Australian astrophysicist, pretty well known. He writes, such stunning accuracy in the precisely balanced universe needed to support complex life is surely one of the great mysteries of cosmology. The belief that there is something behind it all is one that I personally share with, I suspect, a majority of physicists. That there must be a God, he actually calls him God, who is responsible for these laws and responsible for the universe.
Fascinating.
Yeah, which says to me, if you delve into these subjects with an open, unjaundiced eye, the evidence will lead to, at the very least, a designer.
There you
some
go.
sort of order and some sort of intelligence.
A lot of people
he has named it.
A lot of people
Yeah.
complain about that. You know, you're talking about a theistic sort of being, but it's not necessarily Christian. You're kind of undermining Christianity. But I don't think so. I think understanding that there is at least a designer is a first step toward God.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and
So Davies is saying...
Davies is not by himself. He says there's a majority, of physicists, as far as he knows. And here's another one, for example. We won't go through a lot of them here, but just another one. Owen Gingrich, he's a former professor of astronomy from Harvard. He writes, "To me, belief in a final cause, a creator God, gives coherent understanding of why the universe seems so congenially designed for the existence of intelligent, self-reflective life. It would take only small changes in numerous physical constants to render the universe uninhabitable. Somehow, in the words of Freeman Dyson, this is a universe that knew we were coming."
All right, I love it.
Ooh, I
love
like
the term, David, congenially designed.
Yeah. You picked up on that too? I'm so glad you picked up on that.
God put it together, and if you change any of 1,000 variables, we could not be.
Right.
It was all perfectly done for us.
From the big things all the way up, the universe, galaxy, solar system, planet Earth, even down to the atomic level.
Yeah, and by you know, after a while, you start asking, what are the odds that these just happened? You know.
If I'm not mistaken, Davies has written a book. I've got one of his books, Cosmic Jackpot, but he's written another book, I think, called Goldilocks Universe or something.
A lot of these are related to gambling, good or bad, you know, because, you know, what are the odds? If someone starts drawing aces on you for every hand, pretty soon you're going to be wondering, hey, maybe this guy's is deliberately cheating here, you know? And the same thing with the universe. Maybe the universe is deliberately set up to be like this.
Like it says there, you know, this is a universe that knew we were coming.
Right.
So, okay, so we asked the question, why believe in a creation at all? You've given us sort of two answers here, or we've given the two answers. We've all been interacting here. And the first is, well, first of all, the appropriateness of the language of physics and mathematics to describe the universe, that there are minds here to get it.
Right, and that we can understand that.
And the second is that there are these anthropic principles that sort of scream designer, intentionality, God, and these are not the conclusions of Bible study. You know, physicists aren't saying, now what does it say there in Ecclesiastes? You know, they're looking through telescopes.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And a lot of them are opposed naturally to theology or any religious implications. Some of them are forced against their will to this conclusion.
Yeah.
Some of them don't like it.
Right. In fact, a lot of them don't like it.
But they're following the classic dictum to go where the evidence leads.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's move to our next question. Let's transition, which is sort of, okay, so now we've got God or a designer, but what we believe, what CA believes, what I believe, what you believe, probably what many of our viewers believe, is a literal six-day creation.
Yeah.
God said it, I believe it, that settles it, kind of a thing. So, but that's just a matter of faith, right? There's no scientific evidence for that.
Well, if that was true, I mean,
I'll set him up.
if there's no real scientific evidence for your faith, you know, when we're told to provide a reason for your belief, if I asked you why you have faith, what would be your reason?
For me?
Some people would say, I've asked this of a lot of people, some people say because I feel it. I feel that God has spoken to me, I feel this impression, this deep impression. But to be honest with you, I've never felt this. I've never felt this God speaking to me, this deep impression. I haven't had an angel talk to me. So what do I have to give me any confidence in God? And those like me who have never had divine revelation in such a direct way. I'm not discounting it. I'm just saying there are a lot of people like myself who've never experienced such direct revelation.
Got it.
And so for those of us like myself, I think there is abundant evidence in nature, beyond the anthropic principle, to believe in the, not only that the biblical authors intended to write a literal narrative of real events in history, but that this literal narrative has good evidence in nature.
So let me just make sure I'm understanding you. You're saying that what the Bible says about the origin of the world and of course the flood, the catastrophe that took place, that there is scientific evidence to sort of support this.
Right.
Okay.
At least, I mean, for example, Seventh-day Adventists believe, as a church organization anyway, that creation took place in 6 literal days. Well,
I believe that.
If I go outside, you say, well, prove it to me, right? Well, here, let's say, oh, yeah, okay, go ahead and prove it outside of the Bible. I can't actually prove it to you that it's 6 literal days, but I can show you a lot of things that scream catastrophe and short chronology.
So what are some of those things?
At least much shorter than mainstream geology.
What are, and we could talk about the theology, CA, but that's really not the purpose of the program. We could say, what are the biblical reasons for believing that that's what Moses intended to communicate? And I think we're taking Moses at face value. I think we're taking Jesus at face value. He obviously endorsed the Mosaic scriptures and account.
Surely.
So I think we can sort of have that as a bottom line, at least here.
Yeah,
so
at least here for us. But it's not just us, too. Even secular scholars, Hebrew scholars at well-known universities, secular universities, will support us on this one.
Yeah, you shared a quotation with me. I think you have it with you one time from John Barr.
James Barr.
James Barr, who's sort of a renowned Hebrew scholar.
Right.
And he basically says, it's obvious. Why don't you read it to us?
Yeah, let's... Yeah, James Barr, a late professor of Hebrew from Oxford, he writes a very interesting statement, I think. He says, probably, so far as I know, there is no professor of Hebrew or Old Testament studies at any world-class university who does not believe that the writers of Genesis 1 through 11 intended to convey to their readers the ideas that, number one, creation took place in a series of 6 days, which are the same as the 24 hours we now experience, and number two, Noah's flood was understood to be worldwide and extinguish all human and animal life except for those on the ark. Or, to put it negatively, the apologetic arguments which suppose the days of creation to be long eras of time, the figures of years not to be chronological, and the flood to be taken merely as a local Mesopotamian flood, are not taken seriously by any such professors as far as I know.
Whoa. Yeah, powerful.
In other words,
so there you have it.
And he doesn't necessarily believe that Genesis account is correct. He just believes that the authors of the Genesis account intended to convey a literal account of historical events. He just thinks that they're wrong, which is much different.
Which makes it even more profound that he's saying that.
Precisely. Yeah, yeah. So that if you come up with 6 indeterminate periods of time, that cannot be defended from the Scripture.
From the text.
Because those guys are trying to tell you 6 literal days.
Yeah.
So if you come up with anything else, that's doing violence to what they're trying to say.
You nailed it.
For the intent of the author.
Precisely.
It's different to say, well, the author intended to say this and he's just wrong.
Yeah.
That's a whole different scenario.
Argument. It is, yeah.
Right.
Okay. So then what are some of those? You said there are some things that scream catastrophe and scream young Earth.
Right.
Okay, so do a little screaming.
Scream. Scream away.
Scream away.
All right. Let's say you go out to a mountain range, or like the Grand Canyon is a classic example, and you look at
I think we've got a picture of that. Of course,
yes,
many have seen that.
We do have a picture of the Grand Canyon. Here we have sedimentary layers, sedimentary rock. Everybody believes that this rock is laid down by water. The challenge is that most mainstream geologists believe it was laid down over vast periods of time, and that there's gaps in time between each of these layers that are millions of years.
Okay.
But the problem, if you consider this, is that if each layer represented the surface of the ground for millions of years of time, you have to ask yourself, well, where is the erosion, the evidence of erosion, where you would expect to see gouged out places and unevenness generally throughout. And beyond this, Arthur Chadwick from Southwestern, he's doing studies on what's called bioturbation, where burrowing... Bioturbation.
Okay.
Bioturbation.
I was just reading a book on that.
Yeah.
Sure you were.
I didn't get that one.
Oh, it's classic.
What is bioturbation?
There we go. There we go.
Thank you.
That's where I was headed. That's where I was headed.
David's reading notwithstanding. Yeah. What are we talking about?
It's essentially where burrowing creatures go in and churn up the ground.
Ah.
Any creature that
Like my kids.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay.
So, usually over the course of a year or two, burrowing creatures will go and churn up the ground after a deposit of flood sediments and mess up the layers so that you will not be able to recognize the layers anymore after about a year or two. Well, according to Arthur Chadwick and others researching this, within the fossil record and geologic column, bioturbation is minimal at best. It's very minimal. It's not what you would expect if these layers really represent vast periods of time.
Millions and millions of years.
Right, because the layers are so crisp and well defined, and they're so flat for over such vast areas. So you have worms, you have mammals,
you have mollusks and things that are sort of digging in the sediment, mixing it up, But when we see, for example, that picture there of the Grand Canyon, it's just these it's almost like they're cut with a laser.
Yeah.
I was just at the Grand Canyon, and it's just...
Yeah, they're so precise, and
So where's the erosion? Where's the undulations? I mean, because the surface of the Earth today, we just drove here. We're here in southern Illinois. Where's that at?
Evidently, the world was a very, very flat place for a very long time, and it never eroded.
A flat Earth. Okay.
So yeah, that's...
And so what's our explanation of that? What's the biblical explanation?
Well, it seems much more consistent that these layers were laid down by water rapidly, one on top of the other, either by a series of rapid catastrophic events that were closely spaced, so close together that these digging creatures didn't have time to mess up the layers, and that there was no time for erosion between the layers to any significant degree.
Okay, so it just looks like what you'd call, say, rapid deposition, that it was laid down, it was flat, you don't have time for an undulation or unevenness, another's laid down. So it looks rapid deposition.
For example, if before the flood there were no really high mountain ranges to block any sort of tidal action worldwide, and if the whole world was covered by water, you could get massive tidal waves, 2,000 feet tall, traveling at the speed of sound, for example. And what's going to stop them if there's no massive mountain ranges? They'll go around and around, and every time they go around, they're going to lay down another layer of sediment. It's not like I can explain all the features of the geologic column or the fossil record, but those particular features seem to fit better with a flood model, or at least a catastrophic model of shortly spaced catastrophes.
Okay, now you've mentioned erosion there a couple times. I'm a rock climber. I love climbing. I know you're into that too, CA.
That would be no.
But let's just say that I wanted to go to Mount Everest, and I've climbed to the top of Mount Everest, which isn't really a climb, it's more of a hike where there is no oxygen. And I get to the top of Mount Everest, and I begin to dig down through the snow, so to speak. What would I find there? What kind of rock am I encountering at the top of Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on the planet?
You didn't count sedimentary rock on the top of Mount Everest.
The same kind of rock that we see there in the Grand Canyon. This
yes, exactly
laid down by water. What's it doing up there?
Yeah.
Well, when the Indian subcontinent crashed into the Asian continent, it built the Himalayan mountains.
Yeah, okay.
And so those mountains used to be flat and covered by water. Or at least the sediment was deposited by water, and then when they were pushed up...
So they're sort of pushed together?
They pushed up, and then the sedimentary rock warped up on top of them.
Well, here's my question, good doctor. Scientists see this sedimentary rock on the top of the tallest mountain in the world. How do they explain that?
They explain it the same way. They say, yes, it was originally flat and laid down by water, and then they got pushed up, but they just say it was pushed up 50 million years ago.
Okay.
But then the question is, if it was pushed up 50 million years ago, why is the sedimentary rock still on the tops of these mountains if they've been exposed for
50 million years?
We should be more than eroded down to the igneous rock below.
The Himalayas are eroding extremely rapidly. In fact, they're eroding so rapidly that even exposure for 20 million years, like Mount Everest, half of the layers slid off Mount Everest in mainstream geology about 20 million years ago. So here we have exposure of half the sedimentary layer for 20 million years. At current erosion rates, it should have been wiped out 3 or 4 times by now.
Sure.
So why is it still there? That's the big question.
That sort of bespeaks a young Earth.
Right. Same thing for the Rocky Mountains. Why are the sedimentary layers still on top of the Rocky Mountains?
They should have been eroded away.
Yeah, they should have all been washed away because the Rocky Mountains started their mountain building, according to mainstream geology, 70 million years ago.
Wow.
Okay. Wow. So now, we don't take that position. We take the position that this happened more recently and more rapidly and obviously more catastrophically. Yeah. And there's even evidence for that, not just in terms of what we might call ancient erosion, but even erosion right now.
It's obviously the continental movements have created mountain thrusts and uprisings and also deep ocean trenches. The continents have crashed into each other. That's pretty clear to all of us. We just, at least I believe, that this happened much more rapidly than mainstream geologists do.
Yes.
Now, anyone who's looked at a globe or a picture of a map of the world, the continents sure look like they'd fit together just like a puzzle piece. I mean, if you could just sort of move the eastern and the western worlds together, and we've got a picture there on the screen, and you sort of stick them together in the middle, say, of the Atlantic Ocean. So this is called Pangea.
Yeah, the continents, before they split apart, it's given the name of Pangea. But the splitting apart of the continents, according to mainstream thinking, happened about 200 million years ago. So,
and there were people there that were observing it, of course.
Yes. So my question, though, is if it really split apart 200 million years ago, how do you explain current coastal erosion rates that are extremely rapid? Like, for example, in the Carolinas, you get rapid coastal erosion up to meters every year.
Meters?
Meters. And same thing with California.
Oh,
Florida's spending a lot of money trying to prevent erosion. Japan is really concerned about erosion because that's all they got, you know, that little island. And so let's just imagine, though, let's just say it's 1 centimeter of erosion on average per year.
But some areas are
much
far
more
in excess.
The average is way greater than that. But let's just say it's 1 centimeter.
We'll be gracious.
Right. Well, what's that equate to over 200 million years?
Wow.
It's 2,000 kilometers of erosion on all sides of the continent. So my question is not only
1,100, 1,200 miles.
Miles on all sides.
So technically, had it been around that long, it wouldn't be here.
Not only would it be here, why does it still fit?
Why does it still fit together?
Precisely.
Okay.
Why did all the edges still match up like a puzzle? If it really
so it looks sort of like this, very crudely, but if they'd been eroding away, we wouldn't...
I don't know, it'd be irregular. They wouldn't match over time.
Wouldn't
match.
But they match wonderfully, beautifully.
Right, so it seems more reasonable that there was a recent split, maybe to some catastrophic energy release that was truly massive, and that causes a rapid drift or split apart originally, but as like crashing cars. The start of the crash is very rapid, but as the energy is released or absorbed by the crashing cars, the cars slow down. And the same thing with the continents. As they crash together, they slow down, building all these mountain ranges, and ocean trenches uses up energy, and it slows down this crashing effect.
But if these erosion rates have been going on at the current rates, which is, I mean, and we've been very conservative. We've said 1 centimeter a year. We wouldn't expect it to look, so that looks like that happened recently.
It looks to me like it does, yes.
Okay.
And the same thing with surface erosion, or a similar thing. Surface erosion rates are happening very rapidly at about 30 billion tons per year of sediment is being deposited into the oceans every year. And arguably only about 2 billion tons of that is being subducted underneath the continents per year.
That means one sort of being shoved under the other continent.
Right. So you have a surplus of 28 billion tons a year.
So let's just do that math again. You have sort of 30 billion tons of sediment per year, and then deposited into the ocean.
By rivers, you know.
Of course. And then you have rains and things. So you have, and then 2 billion of that we can account for by subduction.
Right.
So where's the other 28 billion?
Well, it builds up into the oceans, but right now we have about 10 to the 17 tons, to the power of 17 tons of sediment in the oceans. And that sounds like a lot. It's a big number.
10 with 17 zeros.
100,000 billion tons of sediment is in the ocean. But if you actually do the math, you can account for that in less than 5 million years at current sedimentary deposit rates into the ocean. So we're like, well, you know, this is, if it really
has been going on for
to 200 million years, you know, it should be filled with sediment by now. You know, a lot more. Why is there so little sediment? And beyond that, why is there any sedimentary layers left on top of the continents? Because they should all be washed into the ocean within 10 million years.
Now, good Dr. David, we are racing towards the end of our first hour, and you can see what we're doing. This may be a little technical, but stick with us. This is good information. This is the kind of thing you may want to just write us and get the tape or the DVD, because there's a lot of good information here that will fortify you and sort of buttress your argument and your faith in a loving Creator God. You are interested in sending us a question, something we're saying is piquing your mind, or if some of these big words a good doctor is throwing at us, you want to know what they mean, you can contact us, questions in the second half, live at 3abn.org for your questions, comments, or again, 618-627-4651, and we will try to get to them in the second half. Our time is fast slipping away, but I find this fascinating. I truly do. I'm fascinated by the idea that my faith is backed up by good, hard science and empirical evidence, and we're getting a lot of that tonight. David?
Well, I think that some of the evidence we're sort of getting into here is as you say, buttressing our faith. You know, think of the classic definition of faith there in Hebrews. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, but what's that next word? The evidence of things not seen. We often think of faith here and evidence and science here, but the truth of the matter is that all faith rests on evidence. And what we're doing tonight is we're just looking at some of that persuasive evidence. Now, it's not proof. You know, proof exists basically only in math. But what we're looking...
Not even in math lately.
Yeah, that's true, that's true. But people say sometimes, prove to me there's a God. Well, what we're going to try and do is provide evidence here that says, hey, give this a chance. Invite Jesus into your heart. Ask Him to come and reveal to you the truthfulness of His Word, because the scientific evidence, the data, is there to support the Bible's chronology and perspective on the earth, on the universe, as we've learned, and even down to the atomic level.
I am so thankful to know that God made an earth, a world, a universe that can be understood, and then gave me a mind to understand it, which is your first point, which I think is just fabulous. I think it's really good. Well, our time has slipped away for this first hour. You take a break, get a drink of water, breathe in, breathe out. We will do the same, and then we'll see you in just a few moments as we come back and talk about more really good stuff. We'll be right back. We are back, and we're having a good time. You know, you meet people that you like them instantly and immediately, and good Dr. Sean, feel very, very comfortable with him. And
Thank you for having me.
The information is technical, but this is good stuff. And I'm glad you're here. And David is an old friend, old buddy by now, and we're glad that you're both here.
I love being here.
Yeah, we've gone through a lot, and there is yet more ground to cover. So let's go to it. We have answered the question, why believe in a little six-day creation? We've dealt with
sort of talked about that. We do have one more piece of evidence there that you're going to find staggering, absolutely staggering. I think we've actually got some images here that will come up in just a bit. But there was a paleontologist who was digging. She found a T-Rex bone. We all know what a Tyrannosaurus Rex is, many of them, and she took that bone and she sort of mineralized, or what's demineralized the bone, so that she could sort of look at the soft tissue, etc. And she found what we see here on our screen. What are we looking at, Sean?
She found soft tissue that was still flexible and pliable and elastic. And within
what are the little red things there?
Within that soft tissue, she found blood vessels with blood cells inside of them. And the blood cells had identifiable sequenceable protein, hemoglobin, that actually elicited specific antibody responses.
Wow.
And a lot of people initially doubted this because scientists had gone on record saying proteins, sequenceable proteins in soft tissue like this could not last more than a few tens of thousands of years, maybe 100,000 years at the maximum outset. And yet these T-Rex bones, 60, 65 million years old, according to mainstream thinking.
Yes.
And so this came as a huge blow to the scientific community, and a lot of scientists thought maybe this was contamination, maybe these structures were preserved by biofilms, modern bacteria had kind of produce these structures, but that has since been disproved, that these are actual proteins, real proteins from the dinosaur itself.
Okay, so let's get the picture here. These dinosaurs, based on mainstream geology, T-Rex sort of 60, 65 million years ago. Now you're not only a pathologist, you have a specialization within pathology which deals with blood.
Right, hematopathology.
Okay, so hematopathology. So you're dealing with blood every day, right? So let me get the picture here. If I walked out in the woods here, heaven forbid, and fell over and died, I wouldn't think that much of me would be around 65 million years later, and certainly not my blood.
And no one else thought that either until Mary Schweitzer found this discovery.
So a dinosaur falls over, it becomes fossilized, was obviously either killed by the flood or was covered shortly thereafter after it died by a flood. And, okay, fossilization of bone is okay, because a bone is a reasonably hard material. But now she's looking inside and she sees, I mean, what would she have thought when she would have seen these erythrocytes, these blood cells? What would she have thought?
She thought that they were some artifact at first. And then she said, but they certainly look like blood cells. So she went and showed them to her boss, and the boss says, well, prove it wrong. Try to prove it wrong. And so she did all these tests and actually proved it right.
Wow.
And one of the tests they did, didn't you tell me something about they injected it into a rat or something?
Yeah, they injected it into lab animals, and that's how they discovered the specific immune response to hemoglobin.
Wow.
So they know it's hemoglobin.
Right.
And it's Tyrannosaurus Rex hemoglobin.
Correct.
Now, how does that stick around for 65 million years?
No one really has a good idea on how that can happen for that long.
And so what you're saying is before Mary Schweitzer made this discovery, the uppermost limit for how long something like that would be expected to stick around would have been
100,000 years.
100,000 years.
Right.
As the uppermost limit.
Right.
Wow.
Even in mainstream thinking.
So this would communicate, from our perspective, hey, this screams, this smacks of young Earth. This thing was buried recently, just within the last several thousand years.
Yeah, it's much more consistent with a recent burial, like within less than 10,000 years. It's much closer to that now, it seems like, at least before Mary Schweitzer came on the scene, than versus, 65 million years.
And now, she's not a creationist.
She's not, and she still doesn't believe that this actually represents evidence for young Earth.
So she has unearthed evidence that. My question is, what then does science do when it runs into smack into something that says your theories are wrong? Does it suspend its own belief system? Because we're about finding evidence, and then we're going to take that evidence and say, what does that evidence mean? Well, this evidence leads to a certain conclusion.
Well, they do say,
they don't want to make that.
They do say we were wrong. Oh, yes, we were wrong, but we must have been wrong about the preservation of proteins. It must now be possible to preserve them for 65 million years. Because you can't challenge Darwinism. You can't challenge evolution. That's
we're going to talk about.
That's kind of like a holy doctrine, which you can't really touch. But you can modify your other theories in order to fit the new evidence back into that.
Okay, now what about, we've looked at some of these evidences, why believe in a literal six-day creation, but what about the person who says, but they've already dated the rocks? I mean, you go dig up a rock, you pick it up, and I say, well, are there labels attached to these rocks? I mean, someone's going to be bound to be watching the program, or someone's going to show this program to someone, and they're going to say, oh, well, they've dated the rocks conclusively to millions, and in some cases, billions of years old.
Right. And in some ways, the rocks are labeled. There are radiometric dating methods that you can use to date rocks. And I'm not going to...
that gets a little technical, doesn't it?
Right, it's very technical, and I'm not going to say it's simple or that we have all the answers on the young Earth side or young life side of the equation. Now, there's some mysteries still out there for radiometric dating, but there's also some mysteries for the other side. For example, there's been fairly significant quantities of carbon-14 discovered within these old fossils, and also coal and oil as well. It's very hard to explain how carbon-14 can be there, a radioactive element, because carbon-14 is supposed to be completely gone, non-detectable, within less than 100,000 years.
And some of these fossils are millions,
tens and hundreds,
by traditional geological standards, millions of years old, and yet they still have carbon-14 in them.
Simply shouldn't be there if this is true.
Right, and also there are discrepancies between other dating methods like fission track dating and tektites versus carbon-14, and that's also technical as well, but not all dating methods agree, and the same thing is true. Dating methods can also be done without radiometric dating, at least age approximations. For example, the erosion rates is a way...
That's also a geologic clock.
Right, it's also a way to estimate age or elapsed time between physical features. And sometimes these things dramatically disagree with standard chronology.
So would it be safe to say that when we're dealing with science, there's two things? There's the facts, and then there's the interpretation of the facts, or the evidence and the interpretation of the evidence.
Or you might call it the data and the interpretation of the data. And everybody says, well, religion is about faith, making leaps of faith, and God doesn't give us all the evidence because He wants us to have faith. But for me, if you have more evidence, your faith increases. The more evidence God gives you...
That's Hebrews 11.
Right, the greater your faith is. I mean, the disciples, did they have more or less faith after the resurrection of Christ?
Oh, great.
Right? They had more faith because they had more evidence.
Right.
And science is the same thing. People say, well, science isn't about faith, but it is. Science interprets data and makes predictions based on limited data about the future that is never perfect. There is always the possibility of being wrong in science, and that's where...
That's really the attraction of science.
Right, and that's where the leap of faith comes in. If you cannot possibly be proved wrong in science, you're not being scientific. So by definition then, scientists themselves make leaps of faith when they come to their conclusions.
That's actually one of the standards of science, falsifiability.
Correct.
Is the theory even theoretically disprovable?
Correct.
Now another thing, you're just talking maybe ever briefly here, just ever so briefly about science in general. Science doesn't really arrive at truth as such. It sort of
narrows the field, right?
Yeah, it narrows the field.
It's able to detect error and therefore narrow the place where truth is likely to be found.
Okay, so just a moment ago you mentioned, let's sort of transition now to our third question. This seems like a very appropriate place to do it. And that is, we sort of dealt with why believe in creation at all. And then why believe in a literal six-day creation. We're sort of looking at some evidences here. But then you mentioned there's this sort of holy grail, or this sort of holy cow, just untouchable, don't touch the sacred cow, and that's Darwinism.
at least his mechanism.
His mechanism. So let's now ask the third question, why not believe in Darwinism?
Well, that's a really good question because there's a lot of reasons to believe in it. For one thing, his mechanism works, and that may come as a shock to hear a creationist like myself say that the Darwinian mechanism works.
Okay.
And
you got a lot of explaining to do right now, doesn't it?
Yeah, the Darwinian mechanism, for those who don't know, is random mutations, genetic changes that are random, combined with natural selection or survival of the fittest.
Survival of the fittest,
right,
okay.
Yeah.
in the usual vernacular. And so that actually works. Both of those forces happen in nature. There are random mutations, and there is survival of the fittest.
Okay.
But as a little child, I wonder if there were any limitations to this mechanism, and there are. There are limitations to the mechanism, and the limitations are very interesting. The Darwinian mechanism only works to produce what I call very low-level functions of complexity.
Yes.
Beyond a fairly well-defined line, the mechanism simply doesn't work. It stalls out. And it stalls out in what I call an exponential manner.
Okay. So if I can sort of put some English on this, you're speaking scientese, if I can sort of put some English on this, you're saying that there is evolution to a degree, that is to say the mechanism. It doesn't mean we're endorsing long ages, but you're saying it only can do so much. Now, explain this to us. Is there something you can give us sort of tangible that you've used this great illustration that I've seen before with a Scrabble board.
Right, yeah. Especially when you're trying to derive information from nothing. There's two different ways to derive information, starting with something and then starting with nothing. The Scrabble illustration is starting with nothing. So in the first illustration, there's a random sequence. You just kind of looks random.
Okay.
Would anybody think that this necessarily had to happen deliberately, or could that often happen randomly?
That looks pretty random.
Pretty random. Like you wouldn't doubt me if I just say I threw out those letters on the Scrabble board and they just landed like that.
Okay.
You wouldn't question that, right?
No.
However, in the next slide, you can kind of see a little bit of maybe readable English words.
Okay, I see the word. I see pig there.
Yes.
Cat.
Cat. All right. So would you believe me if I said I threw the Scrabble letters out a few hundred times and this just happened one of those times? Would you believe that?
A few hundred times?
Well,
perhaps.
Because I know you and trust you, maybe. But this is obviously a lot different than the one you
Well, it's not totally unbelievable if I said that, right?
Yeah.
So what about the next Scrabble situation? Now, would you believe I threw those letters out even a few trillion times and it landed like that?
No way.
Wow. Happy Sabbath, God welcomes you all.
Yeah, I gave this as a sermon illustration a few Sabbaths ago at my church. And everybody voted it down. No one would believe that. But why not? It's because of statistical odds. The odds against this happening by random chance are just so remote.
Okay.
Well, the same thing happens actually with starting with meaningful sequences. Like, let's say you start with a three-letter word, and what are the odds of getting another one that's meaningful in English?
Okay, okay, because there's 26 letters in the English alphabet.
Yeah, there's 26 letters in the English alphabet.
So we're talking about three-letter words, words like car, pig,
cat, bat,
okay.
whatever. So what are the odds? Well, it's related to concept of sequence space in order to calculate these odds.
Sequence space, okay.
So sequence space is a space that contains all possible words or sequences of a certain length.
Every possible option of three-letter words in the English language.
Right.
Okay.
So that's 26 power of 3, 17,000 something. So the ratio of meaningful versus non-meaningful English words in Scrabble dictionary is a ratio of about 1 in 18. So let's say you
you just randomly assembled things. One time out of every 18 times, on average, you would have a meaningful three-letter word.
Right.
The other 17, you'd just have gobbledygook.
So what are the odds of getting from like cat to hat to bad to big to do all the way to dog? Well, it's pretty reasonable. In a reasonable amount of time, you can get all the way from cat to dog using meaningful one-character mutations that changes one letter at a time into another. And you can hit on a new meaningful word.
Okay.
So, but what if you increase the length of the word? Or the sequence, what happens to the odds? Like, let's say we go to 7-letter characters. Do the odds like decrease by half?
Oh, it'll probably be much more than that.
No, it's an exponential relationship. You
Do we have a slide that explains that?
I think we do have a slide up here. So, see, meaningless 7-letter sequences, there's 8 billion of them. And meaningful, there's only 23,000. So the ratio is 1 in 350,000. So the ratio is much different than 1 in 18.
So you'd have to do this 350,000 times to get one word that makes sense.
A 7-letter word.
A 7-letter or a 7-letter sequence.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And those odds keep going down exponentially.
Yeah.
Well, the same thing happens in living systems, because living systems are actually informational systems. And I think we have slides to illustrate this. They're actually comprised of characters of DNA, which are 4 letters, instead of human English having 26.
There's our slide.
Right. DNA has 4 characters labeled A, T, C, and G. They stand for chemicals.
Amino acids, are they?
Nucleotides. Yeah. And so they stand for these letters, chemical letters. And the same thing for proteins. Proteins, there's 20 different amino acids. And so that's kind of like an alphabet. Well, functional proteins require a minimum number of these amino acids in a specific linear sequence.
Wow.
Kind of like a word.
And then they get folded into a specific 3-dimensional sequence.
Okay.
It's even more complex than that.
Okay.
Like a paragraph.
And without this...
There we go.
Right. And so the bigger the minimum, the exponentially lower the odds that you're just going to randomly hit upon that.
Yes.
Starting with something
Yeah.
else.
Okay.
You see the difference?
Okay, got it, got
And
it.
so as you consider higher and higher level systems, the odds of randomly hitting upon that using random mutations
and lower.
drop exponentially lower and lower until, if you look at examples of evolution in action, there are none that require, no examples of evolution in action produce any system that requires more than 1,000 specifically arranged amino acids working together at the same time.
So there's no, in the literature, there's no evidence of evolution being able to produce a function, a novel function, beyond a 1,000 amino acid.
Actually, in
level.
literature, it doesn't go beyond a few hundred, but I just draw the line at 1,000 because that's very clear distinction where evolution clearly has stalled out completely by then in an observable time.
Okay, so put something visual on that. What is okay? So a simple cell. Take a cell or a bacteria or something. How many amino acids would it take to have, say, a cell?
Well, a simple cell probably. There's actually been studies on this. What does it take to code for a simple cell all at the same time? And it's enormous.
Far beyond this 1,000
Right.
structural
Every
function.
single living cell system has many systems that require more than 1,000 by far. And to get a system, if you actually sit down and do the statistics, even starting with existing gene pools, starting with existing systems, to get a novel one that's qualitatively unique, that requires a minimum of more than 1,000, it would take trillions and trillions of years of time on average.
Trillions and trillions of years.
Yeah,
well, even by the most, the longest estimates, the Earth is what?
No, 4.5 billion.
4.5 billion years, so that's not even approaching the trillions.
No,
I mean, the universe is only supposedly...
People think a few billion years, oh, that's so long, anything can happen in that. But if actually you do the math, a few billion years is a drop in the bucket. It doesn't come close.
If it takes longer for the chances of a thing to happen than time has actually existed, then technically it cannot happen.
Yeah, at least reasonably, it doesn't seem rational that it could happen in that.
But this has been proved in a laboratory, right? They can, but human beings can get in there, right? And they can sort of make it happen, right?
Well, human beings can produce much higher levels of complexity than can happen by this mechanism of random mutation, natural
But I'm
selection.
saying genetically, can we start doing this? Can we
Yes,
manipulate?
humans are now manipulating genetics far beyond the 1,000 amino acid
But
level.
that just shows that it takes intelligence to do it. If we
Right.
just do it randomly, which is all that typical evolution can give us, Darwinian evolution.
If you base your selection mechanism based on function alone without specifically picking out the underlying genetics, even humans that select based only on function, like human breeders, for example, even as a breeder,
breed a dog or breed
right,
a horse.
even if as a breeder, a human breeder cannot change a dog based on breeding alone from a dog to a cat or any other type of creature besides a dog. It's the selection mechanism that's the problem.
Yeah.
If you're only basing your selection based on what you see expressed as the phenotype, you're not going to produce anything else.
So let me try and see if I can summarize this here. We asked the question, why not believe in Darwinian evolution? And I'm hearing sort of two answers here. One is, we've got this information issue, information content, you know, versus the throwing out on the Scrabble board versus the happy Sabbath, everyone, God welcomes you, etc. That's number one. And number two, it's that the mechanism can't get that. The mechanism doesn't do it, doesn't get us that level of complexity.
Right, because the mechanism, once you get higher levels, the gaps between functional systems and sequence space start to grow in a linear way. And as the distance increases linear in sequence space, the time required for the mechanism to get there increases exponentially.
Can't do it.
Because it's a random walk.
You know, this makes me think of like if, you know, I'm a trout fisherman, so I love to go walking up the streams and fly fishing, and sometimes when you don't want to get wet, you'll try to just jump from dry rock to dry rock across the river, which is possible,
Right.
as long as those rocks are
short.
reasonably close. But
Yeah.
but what if the next rock was 16 miles away? I can't. I mean,
And-
I know you're surprised to hear that I can't jump 16 miles.
And you were blind
Ooh.
on top of it. Because natural selection only selects those things that work now. It doesn't select for anything that doesn't
That
work.
may work in the future.
Right, that may work in the future or doesn't work right now. There's a like, what's the difference
Now, that's
between...
an important, and forgive me, because that's an important
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
Because the prima facie assumption is that you can cross these boundaries. I mean, a dog will, or it may be a short-eared dog, a long-eared dog, a short-legged dog, a long-haired dog, but it's going to be a dog. It's not going to be a cat. That cannot happen.
And it's not directional.
And what people
Right.
often confuse, and what Darwin himself confused, is that these different breeds of dogs and cats weren't really based, at least largely to a significant degree anyway, on Darwinian evolution. They were actually based on what's called Mendelian variation to a significant degree.
Gregor Mendel.
Right. And
Father of modern
in fact, it's kind of like preloaded information. The information for all the different dog breeds was largely present in the original dog kind.
Yeah.
So
The wolf type
the
dog.
capacity for a Chihuahua and the capacity for a Great Dane and the capacity for a Golden Retriever, all the data is in there.
Dog.
All in the same
The
original
breeders
dog
are just
gene pool.
teasing that out, so
Right,
to
it's
speak.
the Chihuahua and the Great Dane are just different expressions of the
Same
same
dog.
static, unchanging doggy gene pool of options. They're just different expression of the different portions of the pond.
Okay, so then in answer to the question, why not believe in Darwinian evolution, what I'm hearing you say is the mechanism doesn't work. It can't get us, it's not delivering the goods.
It works, it just doesn't work well.
It's not sufficient.
Okay, so
Right.
yeah, you
Not
keep
sufficient,
saying it
yeah.
works, so you're a pathologist, and you know it's...
Like antibiotic resistance.
I was
for
just going to
example.
say, what about, okay, so something becomes resistant to antibiotics.
I'm glad you were going to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, were you headed there?
I was going to say that.
Antibiotic resistance is a real example of evolution in action. Darwinian evolution is the result of random mutations and natural selection. And it happens very rapidly. But the way most antibiotics works is on a very low level of complexity. For example, here you have a target in an antibiotic, and here you have the, I'm sorry, in a bacterium, let's say, and here you have an antibiotic that comes along and attacks the target, right? Let's say the target in the antibiotic, in the bacterium, has a mutation and it sticks out a finger. Now the antibiotic comes along and it can't bind as well as it did before.
Okay, so it can't...
So all of a
the
sudden,
attack.
with one single mutation, little point mutation, it can't bind as well, and you gain resistance. The odds that you're going to get a little mutation like that are very good. And
Because it's a simple thing.
It's a
It's like a
simple-
three-letter word.
Right.
It's not a eight-letter word.
Or it's actually a disruption of a interaction that was pre-established.
Yeah.
It's easy to destroy something like Humpty Dumpty that was already working before, because there's so many ways to break Humpty Dumpty. But try to put it back together again.
Yeah.
There's a whole different
I have an
situation.
example for that.
Okay.
Super rat.
Super what?
Rat. In New York City, they have a super rat.
Really?
They've used so much DDT and pesticides that there is a rat now that is...
It's resistant to pesticides.
He's resistant to pesticides.
Right.
Really? Does he wear a cape?
He doesn't fly through
Not
the
as far
air.
as you know.
Praise the Lord. But super,
Yeah.
it's evolution in a very minor... He's still a rat. He's just resistant to those kinds of things that we've been using to kill off rats for so many years.
And most of those forms of evolution are the result of a loss of a pre-established function. There are actually examples of evolution that are the result of a true gain in function that wasn't there before, that's not the result of something else breaking down.
But that's got to be something simple.
There are simple,
be
but they
simple,
only
yeah.
happen up to a few hundred characters.
Yeah.
So there's nothing in all of the vast literature of you know, pro-Darwinian biology and other
Yes,
disciplines that says that in a laboratory we can go beyond 1,000 specifically arranged amino acids. It's not happened.
There are assertions to that effect, but none of these assertions are demonstrated by actual fact, like in a laboratory experiment, nor are they demonstrated by statistical analysis. If you ask for either one, somebody will just call you stupid, that you're ignorant, blah, 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 but no one will actually give you the data.
Okay. Okay, so then let's transition to our fourth question, which is, what is the greatest creative act? We've asked why believe in creation, why believe in a literal six-day creation, why not believe in Darwinian evolution, and then now, what is the greatest creative act?
Oh, in that line, I hope you don't mind if I read a little quote from a very wise woman.
Sure, I'd love to hear it.
She says, the greatest, I happen to agree with, the conversion of the human soul is of no little consequence. It is the greatest miracle performed by divine power.
Wow.
And it happens to be a miracle that you can experience inside yourself that you don't need science for. Like you can say, Do I need science to tell me I like vanilla ice cream? Do I need to test it? Or do I have peer review, right? Anything like that? No, I just know it inside. No one needs
You know it intuitively.
No one can argue with me. No, you don't, right? Same thing with this conversion experience. You know it inside yourself. You can experience the divine touch in your heart and a changed life.
And she says here that it's the greatest miracle.
It is the greatest. It's greater than creating the universe. It's greater than creating life itself. The conversion of the human heart. Because what did it cost God to produce this miracle?
Everything.
Wow.
Right? It cost. He emptied heaven to do it.
Precisely.
So that, you know, what just comes screaming to my mind, of course, is 2 Corinthians 5:17. You know, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature, a new creation. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new.
You mind if I do a little aside here?
No,
it's kind of like a butterfly. Do you know that the caterpillar actually is two creatures in one? It has these cells in it that will liquefy the caterpillar, turn it to sludge. Completely liquefy the caterpillar. The caterpillar doesn't like this liquefaction process.
I bet not.
And it tries to attack these cells with its immune system and destroy them. But these cells overcome the caterpillar and liquefy it and use the nutrients of the caterpillar to produce the butterfly.
Wow.
And actually the butterfly is an entirely new creature, nothing at all like the caterpillar.
Really?
No caterpillar parts are in the butterfly.
So we used to say, like I would have said, the caterpillar becomes the butterfly, but it's that the butterfly cells are in the caterpillar.
Yeah.
And then the caterpillar is...
No more.
No more.
Yeah, it is a truly new creature.
Wow.
So it's kind of an illustration of
Very
us.
powerful.
We lay off the old and we put on the new, and we step into the power of Christ.
And I love what you said there, that we don't need to... Science doesn't tell us that. God tells us that. It reminds me there of Romans chapter 8, where Paul says the Spirit of God bears witness with our spirits that we are the sons and daughters of God. The Spirit comes in and cries, Abba, Father. I mean, I know that intuitively. You know that. CA knows that. And our viewers can know that.
And even those people who haven't yet recognized God are searching for Him. Because
Amen.
I think God has put an empty spot in each one of us that we search to fill. And it's never filled until we find God.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Praise God.
Well, there we are. There we have it, CA. I'm thrilled. We've been able to, I think we've got some questions, but we sort of made it through, you know?
Indeed, we did. I like the idea, the notion that as great as creation is, and that is the groundswell of our argument tonight and what's being taught in schools, a greater testament to the God that we serve is recreation.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Praise God.
Love it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You can argue about creation, but you can't argue about recreation.
Amen.
Praise the Lord.
Beautiful.
We've got questions that have been coming in. Dee has been bringing in questions all evening. Someone wants us to wrestle with a little bit, good doctor, macro versus micro evolution, and we actually kind of touched on that a little bit. But and the irreducibly complex systems.
Yeah, I love that because, well, in a certain way, I don't actually like the term micro and macro because to me, evolution, the mechanism is on a continuum. Evolution works at what I call low level of complexity, below 1,000 amino acids, and if you want, you can call that the micro level. But it doesn't work beyond that, which if you want, you can call that macro level. Irreducible complex systems basically mean, Behe came up with this.
Michael Behe.
Michael Behe came up with this term, irreducible complexity. Basically, it means if you have a system and you take a piece away, every system requires a certain minimum before it will work to do a certain type of job. If you take that minimum part away, it doesn't work at all to do that particular function. Usually the problem with irreducible complexity arguments is that someone will show you an example of evolution in action and say, hey, this system is irreducibly complex and yet it evolves. Like Kenneth Miller does that all the time. He's a famous biologist from Brown University. But the problem is that when they show you an example of an irreducible complex system evolving, it's a low-level system. Just because a system is a three-letter word doesn't mean it's not irreducible complex. It still requires those three letters, but it doesn't also mean it's very complex. It's still a simple three-letter word. So irreducible systems can evolve, but not beyond low levels of complexity or irreducible complexity.
Okay, great.
If that makes any sense.
That makes great sense.
It does, it does. The writer of this said to say hi to you, David, from your churches in Michigan. This is your old stomping ground.
Oh, yeah? I wonder who wrote
so
it.
they wanted to say hello. Christian Hodet?
Oh, of course.
Yeah,
he's one of my old punk rock friends. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. He's one of my old punk rock friends, and now he's a Seventh-day Adventist minister.
Oh, praise God.
Absolutely.
Haven't you done that to several people?
Well, I think the Lord did it. I wouldn't take any credit.
Yeah, praise
wouldn't
the
even
Lord.
try.
James from Washington writes, do you believe that the universe existed before the 6 days of creation of Earth, and why? It's your belief, so you can't be wrong.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Now, I might get in a little hot water over this. I don't really want to argue this point to people who strongly disagree, because I don't carry a strong burden for this. But personally, I do believe that the universe did exist before the creation week. I believe, I'm kind of what I would call a young life creationist. I believe that creation week described happenings for just this earth. And that, because in Job it says that the sons of God sang together
for joy at creation.
At the creation week,
I don't
right?
think that's particularly...
And so where did the sons of God live?
Yeah.
To me, it strongly suggests that there was someplace, a universe here before creation of life on this planet.
I don't find that the least bit controversial.
No. I have a good friend, my eye doctor for many, many years. His father's a rabbi, and when he's playing with my eyes, we talk theology. And it is his belief, and classic Hebrew belief, that Genesis 1 picks it up here, this earth, dealing with what we are and what we have. And I find that consistent with Islam.
Because we're told that the rebellion in heaven occurred before the creation of life on this earth.
Yeah.
And so there was something already
Something
here.
was rebelling.
Something was rebelling, yeah. There's something going on. And something that they fought over, which was the creation of the earth.
I agree with that.
And Lucifer not having a part in that creation.
Completely agree.
Stuff was there. Let's see. What resources are available to prove creationism online? They may get this DVD, but what else is out there?
Okay, well, let me answer this one, because Dr. Pitman will be way too gracious, way too deferential, and humble. Dr. Pitman has a marvelous website, detectingdesign.com. Great title. Great title.
Yeah.
Detectingdesign.com. I have spent hours on that website reading, and I've recommended it, I suppose, countless times. And I just want to recommend it to the viewing audience, to you, of course, as well, CA. Sometimes it can be a little technical. I mean, just to be totally transparent.
Yeah.
For some, it will be a little technical, and I'm always sort of nudging Sean, saying, Sean, you know, okay, you can have sort of the scientese, but give it to us in English as well. But he does a good job of that at times, I think. There are some, at times. Some of the stuff is just, I mean, let's just be honest, some things cannot be
Well, largely the
easily.
website started out as my own thoughts and notes for myself, and then people told me, well, you know, you should put it out there for public viewing, other people might be interested. And so, yeah, some of it is very technical, but other parts of it are more readable.
Oh, definitely. Most of it, I would say. And I should tell you that today when we were on the plane, I was saying to Sean, I believe it was the voice of the Holy Spirit speaking through me to you, by the way, start writing books. Start writing books. Start writing accessible books. And yeah, but go to detectingdesign.com, a fantastic resource that you can steer anybody to. I mean, you get hundreds and thousands of hits on that website. Many people who are antagonistic to your position, but who say, hey, this is some...
It's at least worth talking about. You know?
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of other websites, too, as well, and I list a lot of those on the website as well.
Yeah, there's some links on there.
Yeah, that sort of dovetails into Gail's question. She says, I'm a student at a secular school, have many times been reprimanded for my presenting creation in my scholarly papers and oral presentations. Can you give me a couple of references from other doctors, such as yourself, that I can quote for this purpose? So I suspect there's some of that on your... Oh,
yeah. Yeah, Arthur Chadwick is a great resource, and so is Leonard Brown. He's published a lot of papers in mainstream literature on this topic, especially dealing with geology. Ariel Roth, he's written several books that are very nice to read, and he has lots of references. So there's a lot of resources out there.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting question.
And you can just email you right through the website.
Right, and I can give them a lot more references if they want.
Great.
Yeah, yeah. The thought comes to my mind regarding the literal six-day account of Genesis in the earthly cycle. We get our calculation for the year from the Earth orbiting the Sun. The month is set roughly by the Moon's orbit. Our day is a rotation of the Earth on its axis. But is there any scientific or astronomical evidence for the literal 7-day week?
That's a funny thing. It used to be that there wasn't, right? But lately, it turns out that there's been investigations that those who've tried to go on other types of weekly cycles, like a 10-day week or a 5-day week, they don't do as well mentally or physically. It seems to be like almost a biorhythm, the 7-day cycle. Yeah. So in some sense, there is a fairly recent evidence that maybe there is such a cycle, a 7-day cycle.
Yeah. And I just read an article not too long ago in a secular news journal that basically was a secular person who was starting to keep the Sabbath, not for any religious reasons at all, but just because there was this evidence that she had been exposed to. She was basically making a case for the fact that that the human system operates best on a 7-day cycle.
Especially when you take one of those days off and you devote it to religious
Absolutely. Well, and the thing I thought to myself is, it's looking you right in the face. You know, why should that be?
Right. You start to focus on something outside of yourself.
Yeah.
The rest of the 6 days, you're working, you're focusing on your family, your money, your job, your career, all these things. But on the Sabbath, you get to focus on God, something outside of yourself, and rejuvenate your spirit.
And isn't it interesting that these other blocks of time are based on objective phenomena?
You got it.
Moon, sun, stars, rotation of the earth. But the 7-day cycle is kind of internal thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of a thing between you and God. When you try to do an 8-day week or a 10-day week, it just doesn't work.
Well, the French tried the 10-day, it just didn't work.
Yeah, just
no one likes it anyway.
Can you imagine that long between weekends? Oh,
oh, that would be horrible. Robert from Oregon, the people that believe in intelligent design, what do they do with the Sabbath? Maybe they're saying people that stop at intelligent design and not go all the way. What do they do with the Sabbath?
it's a great question. The reality is that there are many people that affirm God as a designer, God as a creator, even maybe the Bible God, the biblical God, up to a degree, but then the issue of the Sabbath, which is precisely why, if I could be so bold, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. And it's why Sean's a Seventh-day Adventist, because we want to take these things to their natural conclusion.
But it doesn't mean that a lot of people have the same background as we have.
That's
you know, we can't judge the background of a person and what light they actually understand. Just because someone has been, the light has been shared with someone doesn't mean they have comprehended it. And we need to reserve judgment.
And the reality is that many of these people are absolutely very sincere, committed Christians.
Good people. In fact, I tell a lot of my friends that I think quite a number of surprised atheists will be in heaven.
Who followed
as far as they could comprehend within themselves.
Well, Paul does say there, right in Romans chapter 2, that the Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature the things contained in the law. They show the law written in their hearts.
Yeah, and God will just say, by the way, when they get to heaven, God will, I think they're in shock. How did I get here? And God will say, oh, let me tell you a little story.
Let me tell you a story. You're hardly... Well, right there, what is it, Zechariah 13, it says that people will approach Jesus in heaven and say, what are these wounds in your hands? And he'll say, oh, these are those that I received in the house of my friends.
Right, so not everybody knows the gospel story who will be in heaven.
But now the flip side of that is, not to sort of pour water on things here, but the flip side is there's people who are Christians who probably think, oh, I'm heaven bound, but, well, Jesus himself said, there's many that will say to me, Lord, Lord, and I'll say to you, I never knew you. So we need to distinguish between going to a church and going through the Christian motions and being a follower of the Christ. And having the Spirit inside of it.
This is also not to discount the value of being a Seventh-day Adventist, because there's a lot of value in it, in that it makes our lives much better now as well as in the future. We're working with Christ in His field, doing His work in the heat of the day, which some people think would be a burden. They would complain about it, but I think it's a privilege.
Praise God.
Amen.
Praise God. We've got a statement here. This is another question. I would like to first say that Pastor Asscherick is... Now, they have defiantly a man of God. And you are defiantly a man.
Defiantly.
But I think they meant definitely a man of God.
Oh, okay.
And perhaps defiantly also. There are some things that are not meant for us to completely understand. And I agree with that, but there are some things we can understand. We simply must trust and have faith. When Peter asked Jesus about John, Jesus basically told him that it was not his business to know now. His job was to follow Christ. God bless.
Okay.
The same thing with Job. God basically didn't tell Job why he was suffering. What did God do, though? He didn't leave Job without any answers. He just pointed out to him, by the way, Job, I'm smarter than you, I know what I'm doing, and I like you. Right? You know, what else do you need to know?
That is pretty much the package.
Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah. I'll take that. That's great. Oh, I like that. Brilliant. Yeah, we're not going to understand it.
No.
The things that are revealed are for us and our children, and the things that are not revealed, they're for God.
They're for God. Yeah. Robert, I believe completely. I have heard that if the flood is as the Bible says, there would be so much air pressure and pressure of water in the air that no one could breathe.
Well, I suppose if you're underwater, it doesn't matter anyway. Yeah. I mean, we're even told the devil feared for his life. It was a vicious, vicious event.
Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because we sort of have this idea that the flood was like the bathtub.
The water went up, the water went down.
But I mean, it was
vicious, violent.
If I could be so bold, I mean, all heaven broke loose, so to speak. I mean, it was I mean, rocks are flying and mountains are upsurging, and you talked about tidal waves, and I mean, we don't call it a catastrophe for nothing.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
It was.
I read somewhere, I can't remember where the exact quote was, that the water rose 26 feet above the highest of mountains.
Yeah, that's right.
In a violent storm, of course, and again, said so vicious about the devil feared for his life.
In fact, it was so unique that's why we can't really understand all the features of it.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that too, because we're a little bit like detectives sort of coming upon a crime scene.
And how much experience have you had? Even
I wasn't
a
there. I
really
didn't see it.
well-trained geologist who lived 70, 80 years, that's a fraction of the time necessary to really understand what happened, I believe.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, we've only had one of its kind,
Right.
and
It's
none
a
of us are here
singularity.
to see it. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So
we're sort of groping in the dark, putting the pieces together, but what we've tried to do today is say, here's some evidence that certainly seems to fit the young Earth, Genesis, creation. I mean, I just think again of that soft tissue and the blood, the actual blood cells in these 65-million-year-old bones. I just can't.
Incredible, incredible. I think about the hurricane that swamped New Orleans a few years back, and we still ruminate on how bad that was, and that was local.
Or think of the tsunami. The Boxer Day tsunami.
Yeah.
250,000 people.
Yeah.
That was a localized thing.
They're all localized, and this was a worldwide catastrophe. And as you said, water swirling around and around and around and around.
I mean, it was...
we have nothing to compare that to.
No.
Nothing at all. Did God actually create the dinosaur, or where do you think they came from?
Well, this is a really tough question.
It's a good question, though.
It is a good question.
We talked about
everybody asks it, but I don't think it's definitively answerable. I mean, in Adventist tradition, a lot of Adventists believe that perhaps the antediluvians were very smart, and I believe that they were.
Yes.
Antediluvians meaning
before the
pre-flood peoples. Okay.
And they were smart enough to manipulate genetics of creatures and to amalgamate, that's a word often used in Adventism, different creatures together and produce strange things.
Yeah.
That's one possibility. I'm not necessarily saying that's right or wrong, but there's other possibilities, like before the flood, humans lived 10 times as long as humans live now.
Yeah.
And perhaps animals too. And some animals that live now, they don't get old and they grow throughout their whole life.
Like an alligator or a crocodile never stops growing.
It never stops growing.
Right.
Right. And so if an alligator lives 700 years versus 70 years, how big would it might look like a dinosaur?
Yeah.
There are numerous perspectives and sort of theories, hypotheses about where the dinosaurs came from. I like what Sean said there. We can have perspectives, but this is a very difficult question to answer definitively. I just read a fascinating book. Have you read the book? It's like a 700-page sort of semi-scholarly work by David Reed called Dinosaurs.
I've had him here. I've talked with him. About halfway through it.
An Adventist I've read it.
Yeah.
And his theory is, his hypothesis is, he doesn't say this is what happened, but he says here's the evidence, is the amalgamation theory.
Engineered.
And it's fascinating.
And he says this, when you look at how they were constructed, very incomplete, very inadequate. You've got a T-Rex, all teeth and jaws, no hands. You know, they look like experiments on bad.
They look freaks.
They look
like
freakish, yeah.
But you can also get similar distortions by simple random mutations in different environments and quantitative changes in creatures as they originally were. For example, we're told that a lion will eat straw like an ox when we get to heaven. That's presumably how the lion was originally intended to be. Yet that's not how lions are now.
No.
And yet God evidently made lions to begin with to eat straw like an ox. Yet they degenerated from that ideal state. In fact, it requires more informational complexity to eat straw versus meat. So a lion is degenerated. A carnivore is less complex than its original vegetarian state. And so perhaps a similar thing happened to reptiles.
Yeah, I was looking at something just yesterday, talking about pit bulls, how they are bred to attack other dogs. Their bite is much more vicious when they're locked down. You cannot open those jaws. It's a dog bred to kill. And you can do that in a few generations. You know, you can breed out certain things.
I see what you're going to say.
Certain things.
Yeah.
And we think of man as you go back in history as being dumber, more brute, but as you're going back to closer to creation, he actually is smarter, with more faculties, with more abilities, and 1,000 years to get into trouble. You can do a lot of mischief when you live in 69 years.
I get in plenty of trouble just in my...
Precisely.
I think we should at least admit that this is largely speculative.
It is. It is. It is. This question tends to come up a lot also. The stars in the universe are millions of light years away from the Earth. Since God created the universe in only 6,000 years, why is it that we can see the light from these stars today?
Well, that presupposes the question that we already answered earlier, and that is, who said the universe is only 6,000 years old? That's number one.
Right.
Well,
and number two,
the quote often uses that, you know, he made the stars also. You know,
Yeah, that's right.
in the creation week it says he made the stars also,
Yeah.
right there in the days of creation. So isn't that part of creation week? Well, in the original Hebrew, a lot of scholars argue that this was almost as an aside. Oh, by the way, in case you were wondering, he did make the stars. He doesn't necessarily indicate that he made them during the creation week.
And furthermore, let's just even say that that's the case, which I think it is. What did Adam look like? Chances are that Adam was created as a man, you know, with the appearance of maturity.
Appearance of age.
Appearance of age.
Right.
But the difference between a star a billion light years away and Adam with the appearance of age is that God would also have to have created the light in between, which would like make up stuff that wasn't ever really real, which doesn't seem like God to me. God seems more consistent than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, sometimes we kind of leap off a little bit when we tackle some of this stuff.
Well, it kind of gets back to the things that are revealed.
Yeah.
Are for us and our children, and the things that are not revealed are.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun to speculate about some of these things, but to be honest, we don't know a lot of the details.
I've just put down 3 questions because they
Which
are...
makes life fun, by the way.
They are the exact repetition of the questions we just asked. Here's another again about the light. And people are very interested in some of these things. Dare I say that some of these answers we will not have until we sit down and talk it over with Jesus face to face. Gives us something to talk about for the next couple of billion years while we're together. Gentlemen, let's press on.
Great. That's my copy, don't forget.
You know, I'm going to put this in your hand.
Hey, thank you so much.
that you can have it.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Violetta, for sending the email.
This is kind of an inside job, huh? What do you think about, let's see, educatetruth.com, about what they're doing? Are you familiar with educatetruth.com? And I guess it has something to do with signing petitions.
Well, that goes back to the thing that you mentioned right at the outset, and that was this letter that was written by myself and others. Sean has written numerous letters as well. And I think what happened is that many people that you sort of talked about, sort of a groundswell of people that said, hey, we believe that too, and there was sort of a, I hate to use the word frustration, but there was a sense of, hey, let's do something. And so a website was started called educatetruth.com. It's geared not entirely, but largely to the Seventh-day Adventist community. And there's a petition on there that can be signed, which I strongly recommend and urge and advise if you'd like to go read it. Read the petition. But basically it just says, we want people in our Christian institutions that believe, as we believe, purportedly believe that, just to teach that. And these are people that are saying, yeah, we agree, we agree. But to me, the fact that we should even have to have a petition to this effect is a little bit odd. But in addition to the petition, there's also just tremendous articles on there, and there's a little bit of a forum. Sean's got some things on there. So yeah, it's a good website, worthy of your attention.
Yeah. I suspect it is not unreasonable to have people who are card-carrying members of the company preach the company line.
Yeah, it's kind of like Nike and Reebok. I mean, people don't like some people don't like the idea that the church is a business model. They think, oh, it should be a family model and loving and everything. I was like, yeah, well, it could be a family model, but as dearly as I love my mother, who's a registered nurse, I wouldn't want her doing heart surgery on me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you don't believe in the ideals of the organization, or if you think the organization is wrong, why should you expect the organization to pay you for your ideas? This is a matter of practicality, of church order and government, and of business ultimately. It's a church business, and the church has to run it as such. It can't just pay everybody just to say any old idea, because the church has taken a stand.
And it's not just a matter of practicality. Let's be honest, it's a matter of ethics as well. I mean, if I came to believe things that were contrary to what the church teaches, would I be justified? How could I possibly justify taking a check from a church that pays me to teach A, which I happen to believe, by the way, if I'm teaching B or C? To me personally, I couldn't even conceive of doing that.
And not to say that the scientists who are doing otherwise are inherently dishonest. I think a lot of these guys are sincere, honest men and women.
Completely agree.
However, there is a certain ethical problem when you do take money from an organization to do actually counter that organization in a fundamental way.
Well, let me take it even a step further. My perspective is not that the issue resides so much with the individuals that are doing it. If the atmosphere is being created that, hey, this is okay, they can hardly be blamed for continuing to do what appears to be okay. To me, the larger issue of responsibility and even culpability, if I could be so bold, is with the institution. They're the ones that need to sort of police and say, hey, you know.
And it's not really us to say what the institution should do. The institution is bigger than David or I. Precisely. And our goal wasn't necessarily to say, you should be doing X, Y, and Z. Yeah. Our goal was saying, this is what's happening. Is this what you want?
Yeah. And do you
if it is what you want,
I'm sorry, in the role of a subversive, if you're part of the institution, I think part of your responsibility to the institution is to uphold the tenets of the institution.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the next level would also be, just be absolutely upfront in your advertising and in your public, the way that you're presented. In other words, if you promise A, don't deliver B.
Yeah, be transparent.
Yeah, be transparent.
At the very minimum, be transparent, so that parents who are paying a lot of money to send their
Christian
children...
education is not inexpensive.
It's very expensive. Yeah. And a great deal of sacrifice goes into it, and parents deserve to know what they're paying for.
Yeah. And lastly, from a purely ontological, very broad spectrum, we are dealing with things that we believe impact not only on the life here, but on eternity.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's not, well, do you want this? It's not like a sort of a Chinese menu.
Do you want the pizza or the pasta?
Precisely. No, no, you've got to buy the whole thing. And your forever hinges on this. So if you're teaching something that undermines that, you hurt them now, but you also hurt them in eternity.
Yeah. I actually don't mind a teacher teaching something that undermines Adventism. I don't mind it. I just don't want that teacher to demand a paycheck from me. I was like, if you want to do that, that's fine.
There's plenty of state schools.
There's a lot of state schools. There's a lot, if people want to pay you for that, that's fine. This is what America is all about.
Yeah.
But I'm also free to pick and choose who I want to educate my children as
Precisely,
well.
yeah. I got one step further. I guess I'm a bit of a bigot on this. I mind people who undermine Adventism.
Well, but not like in a state school you wouldn't mind. Like we talked at the outset.
Well, I mind that too. There's nothing I can do about it. Yeah, I have a problem with that.
But the idea of scrutiny, that the truth can withstand scrutiny.
Precisely.
But when it's happening from within, it's like, you know, it's unsettling. I mean, to be honest, when I was exposed to this, CA, when some of these things were brought to my attention, and it was brought to my attention not entirely, but largely by an excellent editorial by Clifford Goldstein called Seventh-day Darwinians, I remember reading that and I thought, I must have read it wrong. So I read it again, and I thought, I must have read that wrong. So I read it again. And I had to sort of pick my jaw up off the ground. The Australians would say that I was gobsmacked. And I just was like, oh. So, you know, I'm not the kind of person, as you can imagine, to just sit by and say, oh, well,
And it's not like we're making a moral judgment either. I don't believe that people who believe in Darwinism or evolution or millions of years of life on Earth, I don't believe those people are inherently evil or bad or anything else.
Yeah.
I just think that they're not Adventist in their theology or their
I love what you say there. That's not a moral judgment.
Right, and I also don't think they should be excluded from the church as far as attendance is concerned.
No,
I just think that paid representatives should be held to a higher standard.
Yeah, agreed, agreed. Yeah, we can't judge anybody's heart.
I love those points
because every time someone is converted, they were converted from something else, from error to truth. So at any given point in time, you cannot judge them because you don't know what they'll be tomorrow. Having said that, I like that. On a payroll, no.
Right.
No,
Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, he says, we no longer regard any man according to the flesh.
Precisely.
We don't see them as they are, we see them as they could be in Christ. But we got to get back to the issue of payroll. This is just it's a practical matter, is what you said, and it is.
Because things go chaotic. Anarchy just doesn't work for any organization that has a specific goal in mind.
Precisely. We're going somewhere.
And we have a goal in mind. I mean, they say the success of every movement is movement.
Yeah.
And let's keep this thing moving. We have a message to preach. We have a Christ to share.
You can't move in a splintered direction.
No, we all got to pull in the same direction. You're pulling back, I'm pulling forward. We're not going anywhere.
We're not going anywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
Love
you know what? Time is slipping away from us, and before I take a couple more questions, I want to go to an address roll. You may want to contact either or both of these educated men. We've talked about a lot of things today. Along with getting the DVD, which I highly suggest you do, you may want to have them come. David travels. I'm sure the good doctor can get away every now and again and, and travel also.
He does.
Here is the contact information that you will need.
If you would like to contact David Asscherick to find out more about Arise Institute, you can do so by writing to Arise, Post Office Box 5529, Sonora, California 95370. That's Arise, Post Office Box 5529, Sonora, California 95370. You can also email him at info@ariseinstitute.com. That's info@ariseinstitute.com. It's all one word. Call or write today. They'd love to hear from you.
That is information that we ask you to take advantage of. You can contact David at Arise, and I'm sure he can put you in touch with a good doctor. They are friends. And if you get a group of doctors or scholarly individuals together and you want to sort of set them back on the heels, call in Dr. Sean. I think he'll do
yeah, he's coming to our church here very shortly to come and give a lecture.
Great, great. Here is a question that often comes up. These fossil remains, you get a jaw, you get a tooth, you get a femur, and out of that you construct this whole man. What about that? What do you think about that kind of science?
Well, there's been a lot of pitfalls for that. Like
yes.
One classic example is that there's been a fragment of a bone that was interpreted as being part of a early human skeleton, and later it was discovered that it was part of a rib from a dolphin.
Mm-hmm.
And that was fairly recent. And so not everything is like that. I'm not saying that all anthropologists are completely out to lunch. That's not true at all. But there's a lot of interpretation that goes into this that doesn't always turn out logical at all.
Paleoanthropology, which is the study of ancient men, is hardly it's hardly a first-order science.
Yeah.
It's not Bunsen burners and pulleys, and there's a great deal of interpretation.
There's a lot of storytelling going on.
Yes,
great deal of creativity.
I think of all the sciences, it may be the one that takes the greatest leaps of faith of them all.
Totally agree.
Yeah, yeah. Well, gentlemen, this has been fun. We've covered a lot of information tonight, and we were a little worried that we could get it all in, but I think we did.
Had a great time, too.
Had a great time doing so. David Asscherick, Arise Institute, good to have you here, man.
Always good to be here, Steve.
Always good. And good doctor, you're a little far away. I guess I can reach over and shake your hand. This has been very, very good information. Again, may I encourage you, do get the DVD and go through some of this, because this will fortify your strength and your faith. Our time has fast slipped into eternity. Allow me in closing to wish you grace and peace through our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. We'll be together again soon. Bye-bye.